Okay, this is being recorded just after midnight in the early hour of Thursday, August 31st, 2023, and I'm really kind of surprised that I would even feel enthusiastic enough or outraged enough to say something, because one thing I've learned is that a lot of people want to cause some sort of attitude adjustment on my part. Of course, the symmetry is there sometimes, but the asymmetric prerogatives prevail, don't they? There's something to be said for logic, but it seems like that's the last thing anybody wants to talk about. So it's just my arbitrary opinion then to be disappointed with an article I read in one of my favorite online publications. If I had a lot of money, there's a lot of people I'd want to help, at least nominally. And I'm thinking of this outfit. But because of my poverty, I can't really, give away money even to the best organizations. Nor would the article that I read moments ago lead me to suspend tremendous donations to one of my favorite publications. I think it's a nice overview, somewhat, very polite, responsible group of people. Really, it's terrific. They have a good staff doing great things, but I read about somebody who talks in terms of the received wisdom about the Trumpiest court handling some vital issues in an outrageous way. Well, I don't limit my alarm to what is given as the Trumpiest court. Although I admit, there's quite a concentration of activist adventurism, I guess. It seems that many things are done, it's like watching Jerry Springer, where there's a referee that comes in and saves somebody from being pounded to death by an adversary. Big threats made while being held by a referee so that nothing can actually happen. Maybe that's unfair in this scenario, but there have been some rulings that almost beg for, a rehash at the Supreme Court level. I'm not sure that's a good idea, to say, I would, it's like having a general say, well, I am advocating, bombing somebody into the Stone Age, making points that way, only to find that sure enough the president says no, we're not going to do that. That's supposed to be a win-win situation. Not really. It cheapens the whole thing. But anyway, get into the particulars. The idea is that nuclear waste should not be in my backyard, at least according to some people in Texas. They say, well, of course nuclear waste has to be somewhere. Everybody agrees nuclear waste has to be somewhere. But then the people in Texas have sued to say, but not in my backyard. Well, anyway, to cut to the chase, there seems to be some argument about what prerogatives are involved, and the simple fact is, if the truth be known, judges have sweeping discretion, and some people act as though that was never the case, or never ever supposed to be admitted. So I think the case has to be divorced in a different way from territory. Who knows what to do about radiation that could last for what is it, several thousand years at a dangerous level. If a regulatory body hasn't come forward with a plan for something that will be radioactive, dangerously radioactive, for that length of time, I dare say it isn't unfair or unreasonable for the court to say, well, okay, a claim by somebody, a reporter for a favorite journal or a website, as if it's received knowledge that well, I just don't accept the article, put it that way. I don't accept the article as more than a disappointment. It seems to me that there's nothing wrong with a judge saying that, regardless of what's said in the creation of a regulatory body or anything else, if nothing is said about half-life, that doesn't mean a judge can't say, well, you folks have not come up with a plan for tons of stuff that's going to be reactive for thousands of years. The writer of the article seems to think, oh, well, in that case, you don't need to even worry about it. That's a strange thing to imply. The judge certainly could be sweeping and refuse to sweep a little detail like half-life under the rug simply because it wasn't in the original charter or something. The stuff has to go somewhere, isn't that right? All right. Why can't something be said about requiring that certain standards be reached and achieved anywhere if storage has to be really reliable, as best we know, for some, several thousand years? That issue, in terms of the article, was poorly managed by the reporter. Maybe is he an attorney or what? Or just a common sense? There's an emotional thing about talking about who's Trumpiest. Is it all tongue-in-cheek? Well, anyway, the main thing is the judge certainly can get advice or get a friend to say yes, this and that and the other, or have somebody else stipulated to say this, that, and the other. The net effect being that the judge then can say the agency is not performing well if they want to put stuff with a half-life of 1,200 years, or stuff that has a half-life 1,000 times that in an old outhouse behind a museum in Texas somewhere. My point is, the regulations, the processes, the legerdemain, the expertise should say something about the fact that yes, this stuff has to go somewhere. How will it go anywhere? How will the stuff go anywhere? Some have suggested that you get a big barge and you have a section of it, for the radioactive stuff, and then you sink the barge with cement to the bottom of the ocean, and it won't corrode, for 1,000,000 years or so. I don't know what they're going to say next, but they certainly can't get away with saying nothing about half-life. The argument was offered, well, we can't do this and that because half-life was not mentioned. Therefore, what? The dangers of the half-life don't matter? What if you say, well, let's see, this container has dynamite in it, and how should we deal with this container? Any way we like? Just because nothing is stipulated about the fact that there's dynamite in it? I mean, I just don't understand. What is it? A test? Is it kind of a game? To see who will be baited enough to say anything about what I consider an entry-level Mensa exam, that to bait people to say something. I know they have an axe to grind sometimes on this page, in this one of my favorite ventures, and I wish I had some money to send, but and I see what they're doing with some of the stuff. Life is a circus or cabaret or what, but it doesn't do any good, I think, to become a clever writer who doesn't mind kind of cutting a few corners and what is it? Is it elitism to tell a joke against anybody who responds to a sloppy article where somehow we're supposed to ignore half-life and nobody can talk about half-life because nobody ever did? I mean, so the issue, it seems to me, will be, what to do with nuclear waste, such as my verbiage, toxic phrases, billowing forth, bloviations, what to do with acknowledged dangerous stuff, according to the best science that we have. What to do with it means how to store it, and then get to the question of where, insofar as where has something to do with how. There's a big argument at Yucca Flats, because the idea was it was a stable place, it was not on a fault line in San Francisco or something. Yes, where has a lot to do with where something is put to that extent. But I mean, the first thing is, what are you going to put anywhere? And I wonder, what are they going to come up with, a container for something that's going to last tens of thousands of years with a radiation level that is deemed to be lethal for most of that time, or a good part of it, or whatever. None of that's mentioned in the article. So I think it's just kind of trifling with people, trifling with the reader. It's true that if there was too much of that, then I'd reconsider and have no interest in making a donation. As it happens, the sloppy thinking that prevails in my part of the world is in large measure responsible for my being impoverished. But that's another story, and nobody needs to write it. It seems they do better to figure out what to do with nuclear waste. And it's a terrible question that has been put off for decades, with one temporary solution after another, one stopgap thing. Some even have it, just kind of stacked up, in rotting containers, pending the day when, somebody would decide what to do. Well, if this is all just a game and a farce, if indeed all of this terrible material can be stacked up, like old used tires, somewhere. Well, who's telling the truth about any of it, you know? I'm just not sure. I get the impression that people are really very fast and loose on the matter of nuclear waste, and I think that's a bad thing, you know? But even if I try to take things at face value, and I try, like a lot of people, I don't want to get too involved in the possibilities, but if I take it at face value, that something is terrible and it has to be disposed of because it's very dangerous, has to be disposed of in an expert way. And I read then in the context that says, well, what the hell, you know, put it in the backyard somewhere, but not my backyard. Well, I kind of figure, you know, the least you can do is divide up the questions, you know, and then finally get down to the horrible thing about whose backyard, you know. I don't know, the final thing about Yucca, that was considered what? The entire state said that's our backyard and don't do it. Well, you know, there was the solution. You know, years ago, they didn't make a special effort. They just put, you know, ashes or whatever they had in ordinary steel barrels. Went a few, maybe 200 miles off the coast of New York and just rolled them off, you know, knowing full well they would rot and break apart within a decade. I'm not somebody who say anything authoritative about when the world comes to an end because of that. I mean, maybe if fish that they catch for dinner start glowing in the dark, somebody would figure out it's because of those barrels. If they rolled out those barrels from, you know, the storage in the boat, and we're happy to do that. All right, well, what does that mean? That ever since then people have been lying about the whole question? Well, enough people have been caught lying to the public so that the public gradually has gotten the impression that not only are they awash in lies, but also their ballots, therefore, are no good. They don't know anything. They're not told anything. There's nothing they can do about it because the ballot doesn't allow for more than people who are vetted in terms of not letting the public know anything. We're moving away from democracy, folks. What should I do? Second guess the expertise of someone associated with a publication I like because it seems just adventurous, you know, not to have written a better article. Certainly it's preposterous to say because the statute or the charter or whatever didn't say something about half-life, some can talk about it and others can't, and a judge can talk about this or that but not this business of half-life. It's just awful. And that is separate, I think, from the matter of whether or not judges generally are getting themselves into a terrible situation by demonstrating with a flourish what their enormous discretionary powers can do. You know, it's like, you know, for no good reason they're going to let everybody know that, you know, hey, you know, I could do as I want once I get, you know, my seat on the bench, unless I do something depraved or something like that, you know. And just to, you know, as a matter of rabble-rousing party politics or something, shallow stuff, you know, brazen, elitist, and stupid. I don't like that, whether it's liberal or conservative or anything. You know, it's so much fun, isn't it, to say that judges have usurped regulatory agencies and so on and so forth. The final authority that has been vested in some agency has been usurped by a judge somewhere or a panel. Well, when has that not been possible? And just how many mental reservations do people have when a judge has done that? For example, Brown versus the Board of Education. Remember, we're talking about the Board of Education, okay? What did they say? What would somebody write in the same style that I read today? That they sweepingly took the final decision away from those who are constituted as a body to deal with those questions. Really? Now, I just don't know. I look at the article I'm talking about, and I particularly resent some of it, but all of it seems rather implausible. Well, it would be fine if that's true. What could I do? Just say, well, here's another really terribly funny joke. Sort of like, what about the stories about ethics among the Big Nine? Or what? How do you retire if your name is Roger Ailes? Well, you have a big elitist joke about going out with a bang. That is to say, he's been, banging too many people and that's why he leaves? Well, he's going to retire, right? And so just for the hell of it, make up one hell of a story. The same as seeing Kissinger and Rudy Giuliani in their drag outfits on stage deliberately, as if that is a witty thing to do. Grown men dressed in drag, one of them Henry Kissinger, the other one Rudy Giuliani, years ago in Time magazine, for example. And that's thought to be sophisticated, and certainly, in among the rubes of some place, they said, look at there, what they're doing. Well, they may not know much about sophistication, but I'd have to say, I've never been particularly fond of that kind of exuberance, sort of irrational exuberance, I'd say. I wouldn't want Kissinger or Rudy Giuliani to feel that they should behave like sticks in the mud or anything like that. But I mean, okay, so what do? You're a writer. You're not going to publish a picture of yourself in a Clarabelle uniform, or what? You just write something that anybody can laugh about, like Roger Ailes raped 44 women every month, and so therefore he's been forced to resign. Well, now that's a fine joke, isn't it? Isn't that funny? That is really sophistication, isn't it? Who else? Dr. Bill Cosby, for some reason was so depraved that he did everything that people said about him, and yada, yada, yada. And it even goes to royalty, some stuff about all kinds of stuff. And then, if that's too tawdry or, I don't know, ordinary, then you can get into, writing articles about some agency losing its final authority over its turf, for how long or in what way and for what reason? Well, because the Trumpiest people said so. Really? Will we actually know what really is at issue? As far as I can tell from this article, and my fulminations are about this article, as you can tell, in a strange way, what does Giuliani have to do with that? What good is it to enjoy yourself that way? If you're an attorney, you know your way around. You're not yet to the point where you join in with that cliche about how you're a recovering lawyer, or something that would be an awfully terrible thing to lose out on. I mean, some lawyers do grow up. Not all of them. They do. What do they say? They're doing the best they can. What, at $800 an hour, they sweat blood and don't come up with anything better than what we've got these days. And when they have time, maybe they get a job as a reporter in the sense of journalism, and with a flourish, they amuse themselves about ignorance that they perceive as, well, that's all the whole idea, in terms of thought police. I mean, at what point, I'm sure there's some guidelines, that supposedly the Supreme Court, is fairly nimble, but they still worship, around a pile of paperwork. What are we supposed to believe? That they look through most of that pile of paperwork every year for most things, or what? Well, anyway, in all of that, there's supposed to be some definite lines drawn that have something to do with when a person is practicing law without a license. Well, I tell you, what that boils down to is that, some people can be awfully, candid or clever when they have a law license and write comic books. But somebody else writing a comic book who doesn't have a law license might be thought, practicing without a license. And what kind of comic? What do I mean by comic book? Well, maybe lawyers can define what is or is not a comic book. Can no one else do that? Or if someone did not have a degree and a license, would it be improper to define what a comic book really is, ultimately? I don't know, folks. All I know is that, people decided long ago that one mustn't practice law without a license. Well, certainly, there are a lot of duties of a super clerk that are really best handled by an expert. But I have seen instances where if someone has an opinion, it is vulnerable to attack by people who are going to say, I'm not, a member of any kind of thought police, but you're on treacherous ground here. You're saying something that might be a legal opinion or legal advice. Well, phooey. The way those lines are drawn, that would be a funny article to write, but that isn't what happened about the Trumpiest chord. Now then, in general terms, do I think that judges ought to just set themselves up to diminish effective agencies established by Congress or whatever? Hell no. What judge would really want to do that? What judge would not want to free his calendar of something so majestic as that, so that he could deal, for example, with kidnapping or false imprisonment or anything that just might, come before him or her. I'll tell you what, the judge would really be proud of himself if he did what? Decided where to put the radioactive stuff without examining half-life, if this false reprimand from a journalist might be acceptable. Now then, on the matter of Trump and so on, I don't know what to think, I really don't know what to think, but it's been a joyride, after all. The press put him in office the first time. There's simply no doubt about that. And it's gotten complicated ever since. And I'm wondering if people are not really is it fair to say something simple? That they're like kids playing with matches, playing with fire. Each match representing an idea that is really a hot button or whatever, And well, I don't know what to think. I do know that if I read something like what I read about the Trumpiest court not doing much with radioactive stuff, that would be good, that was explained in terms that would offer some relief to people looking for something better than a cheap trick. I don't know that looking around and finding that kind of writing would leave people really disinclined to pay attention to the antics of people who've decided, well, everything's running fine, why don't we just throw a party, and see how we can entertain ourselves posturing in front of the unwashed. Dare I say something like that? Imagine somebody like me saying that. In terms of what? Any mistakes that any number could refer to, or unfairness, or not to mention something, what? Like apartheid in Israel. I happen to believe that's true in some respects, although people know that I take a dim view of this idea of declaring what Martin Luther King had to do as unconstitutional or illegal or something, BDS is, it seems to me, there again, a throwaway, really a poker game going on between elites, on questions like that, with clashes in every classroom or what, about stuff like that. But people get hurt. And I'll tell you somebody who did get hurt. Robert F. Kennedy died because after a few Tom Collins, Sirhan tried to kill him. And of course there's some stories about, a man wearing a clip-on tie and what he might have done. But, it's one thing to talk about Roger Ailes or nuclear waste, among elites, just putting on a show in front of people that normally would watch what? A football game or what? And when they try to read something, it's going to be so shallow that, the comfort zones are massaged very carefully. And to hell with anything that might matter to anybody. People get hurt, when spoiled brats wear pinstripe suits like, knights in shining armor, and speak to one another over the heads of lesser beings, some of whom now are literally, I guess would be the word, literally living on the street, or rather on the sidewalk of major cities. And nobody seems to have a solution, because somehow in the cleverness of all of this, people have gotten bent all out of shape about what is or is not a moral hazard. It's sort of like abortion. I believe there's no such thing as an illegitimate child. There might be illegitimate parents. And if people have, all this righteous stuff about bringing a baby to term because it would be immoral to prevent that early on, then I think, well, then what are you prepared to do with that mother and child in the gutter or in a tent somewhere on the side of the road. I dare say people have a right to differ, but I think the morning after pill is something that unfortunately is commensurate with a system that will not be fixed by trying to use some tremendous moral hazard difficulty that makes things worse instead of better. And some say, well, that's a compromise we just can't accept. And if you look at the opinion polls, I can see why people don't accept the idea if they can cash in on it. But I'm among those, I won't get into my background and so on, but I'm among those who say early on, if say for example that morning after business, that's better than the alternative when one considers the context of any situation where anyone legally to decide something like that for the parties involved. And I've advocated not only what people have done so far since the attempted cleanup of Roe v. Wade. I happen to favor what happened there. I think the court did just fine. The court has been swamped. Well, that's another story, but they acknowledge that the political winds have put them there, the majority now. They acknowledge they were put there, and not by virtue of their being such good people, but because there was a deal about abortion. Well, let me tell you, folks, that deal reminds me of two teenagers in the back of the car deciding the fate of the world, or what? Jack and Diane, really? You have a better moral compass, really? So that you have to try to find some moral hazard. You're willing to punish newborns for what parents did. And all the grief that follows from all of that because of some sanctimonious opinion about moral hazards that is really messed up. Really messed up. That doesn't explain why the kids are in the back seat, making that big decision. It doesn't explain Columbine instead, or the poverty draft instead, or all the exemplary things that people admire that take place instead. No, it just comes down to raw politics. People will not be told what they can try to think about on a lot of issues. So what are they going to do? Well, they can think about what? Bowel movements, maybe, or aching backs, eczema, heart attacks, pregnancy. I just think, that the victimization of people where that's concerned, and mixing and matching and coming up with strange ideas of moral hazards, I imagine, looking at the whole complexity involved, you might as well be debating how big should the fins be on your next Cadillac as compared to 1959. Those are the kind of questions you put to people around their biology, their psychology, or anything, and it's there's some words to describe what is done with the, there's that word again, unwashed. You know, there's some good symbolism and all kinds of stuff about all that, but when it comes down to, you know, what it also means for some in terms of what? Discretion and faithfulness and, oh, I don't know, ethics. Some people really have a lot to answer for, it seems to me, and they're not being hard pressed. They're being exploited. So yeah. Do I make stupid mistakes? Like, for example, this upload. Guess what? My uploads are hardly seen. You know, very few. I'm not in the Oval Office making a big mistake. I'm just one among many. You know, the whole idea is out of thousands and thousands of efforts, something good might happen. You know, so you know, if I'm really offbeat and so on, it doesn't matter. At least I've done something, whereas some people do almost nothing. And if I find out that I should stop, you know, making these bloviations, then maybe I'll become a football fan or something. That is, as a spectator. But you know, there's something to be said about an attitude adjustment. How about when LSU beat Alabama not too long ago? Now there was an attitude adjustment. I'm sure before the game there, you might say there were some very good predictions. I think it's fair to say. But that's a level of interpretation that is sort of like, you know, worrying about, is it possible to watch hockey on TV? It's, you know, it's hard enough to try to make sense of the malarkey in person, but to try to find out, do they even bother to use a hockey puck? I mean, obviously it'd be much the same if they didn't. Well, I guess what I'm saying is the Digs in Mobile seem dedicated to a frivolity that I found in print on a flat screen. And, you know, I wouldn't have any particular reprisal having to do with one of my favorite publications, or even the writer involved. You know, it was like, you know, he came in, you know, having partied all night or something. Well, that's not the end of him or the magazine or you know, but you know. And the gotcha game is such that, you know, maybe something is all a big trap, you know, that he could prove chapter and verse why he should have written what he did right, rather than he might have done better than what he wrote. And ultimately, I really don't know, but I do know that I've certainly been blabbing my bloviations long enough. I also am wearing a mask because if anybody is watching who is in favor of that, I guess I won't have to answer for that, which is something that is a complication that I suffer. Sometimes I do and sometimes I don't, depending on just how nervous I feel about all that. But I'm not going to say read my lips, even though really, rather than one thing or another, voodoo economics is not just for the rich, it is also for the poor, and the other way around, although sometimes people think it's only one or the other. So, Volcker used to have an attitude about that, and Holland, the Holland of France, and so on. So, scalability, well, I hope that if people are looking for teachable moments, people won't zero in on what goes on in a dark alley. Writ large, everywhere, because of misplaced enthusiasm. Rather, I think the overwhelming number of good lessons during teachable moments would refer to something better than saying don't finesse anybody when you don't really mean it, unless what? If you can trick them into that, you can trick them into what? Well, need I say more? Well, very definitely I shouldn't say more, because this is getting to be ridiculous, and I certainly know that. So at 46 minutes after I started this, I'll stop this, and you can delete it from your main memory, or from your AI, or whatever bubble you prefer.